But I'd like now to turn to Emmanuel Todd, who has some different views on these subjects. Yes. Emmanuel is a political scientist at the National Institute of Demographic Studies, writes widely, and has strong opinions, as you will soon hear. Emmanuel.
Yes. Okay. Well, I'm not an economist. I'm a historian and a social anthropologist, and this is the reason why I'm convinced that the euro will. Well, I don't know about survival, but what I'm certain of is that it will never work. It will never work because there's no such thing as a European citizen. We have different nations. Different peoples and, well, different types of family systems. And, well, just to simplify, there's, in terms of behavior, economic behavior, financial behavior, the French and the Germans, for instance, have very little in common. In France, you have a sort of typically individualistic system with the nuclear family system in the past, rather close to the Anglo-American world, where you also have, I would say, individualistic cultures. Whereas Germany, to a social anthropologist, is very similar to Japan, with what's called the stem family in the past. It's a hierarchical system with single hair and so on. And this has produced a perfectly respectable German culture, which is much more collective, much more efficient, where the individual is not exactly, well, the same kind of individual that we have in France or that you have in the US. And of course, within the unified system, the only effect of the euro is to produce a kind of polarization, economic polarization, that wouldn't have happened if we had retained our national currencies. You see the typical, the French normal behavior to compete or to resist to what's German efficiency. I'm not ironical. It is a historical fact that the Germans are more efficient economically than the French. This is the thing. The Euro people do not want to understand, do not want to accept for many, many reasons. So the usual French attitude in a country difficult to govern, where it's difficult to have an agreement on lowering labor costs, the usual French behavior is to devalue it, because that's a nice way to treat the problem. And there's no social conflict associated and so on. And now we can't. And so there's a tremendous loss of efficiency well, if you compare France to Germany, and the French industry is about to be completely destroyed. There's a root. So it's, to me, I didn't even know that people were saying these days that the euro is safe, that it's going to work, and so on. I'm no longer listening. And I think in France, people, well, even pro-euro people, do not believe this. It's really amazing. The euro is not a normal currency. The normal currency is supposed to help economic activity or make it possible, but the euro is something entirely different. The euro must be served by the economy. It is a jealous god. We must make sacrifices to save the euro. It's something completely different. So it is obvious. Well, it's obvious to most Europeans outside of Germany that the euro is a massive failure. The problem is no longer economic, but we still have to think and get and derive conclusions or new analysis from what's going on. So if the euro is a massive failure, why are Europeans incapable of getting rid of it? You see, well, there's a specific French case. And I would be the first to admit that the French ruling class, are the first responsible for this massive blunder. And the euro, from a French point of view, is one of the most extraordinary mistakes in the history of France. You see, the purpose was to tie Germany, and what we get is tying France to Germany and producing the disastrous situation. So in France, the situation we have now is nobody talks about the euro as a great success. But of course, getting out of the euro is unthinkable, because getting out of the euro in a country like France would be to admit that our ruling class is completely incompetent. So getting rid of the euro in France would amount to a social revolution, opening the way to default on debts and so on. And so we've got this kind of thing. I'll end with a few more things on what Europe is about to become. So we have the situation is moving very quickly, but consciousness of things is a bit slower, you see, because we still have, when we talk about Europe, we still have in mind the wonderful project that Europe was, a community of free and equal nations, you see. Well, some more equal than others. And with the general idea that the differences between the French and the Germans were such that any agreement between the two would mean that everybody would be okay. Well, of course, we've always had doubts about Luxembourg as equal, but that's all. So this was very much an ideology in the French style: liberty, equality of nation, and so on. And now, what the euro has produced is a complete transformation of the nature of Europe. Europe is now turning into a completely hierarchical system of nations. At the bottom, you've got Greece, sort of subhumans, are supposed to sacrifice everything they have. Then you have Portugal, Italy, Spain, Italy, and France as a sort of brilliant second to Germany. And then Germany dominating the whole system. And now when we talk of Europe, Europe is no longer the same thing. The same thing no longer, you see. It's just the place where something like a German hegemony appeared. You see, it's entirely different. So, yes,
you'll have time to.
Yes, I'd like to say a few words. Again, it's everywhere in the developed world. We have a sort of general drift to inequality, a massive, even more massive, in the Anglo-American world, in fact. But and this we have, or we're beginning to have in Europe. But what is happening now is that this, within a European context, this drift to inequality is combined with a sort of the general European tendency, or Central European tendency, to authority. You see, so and to a drift away from democracy. So really, when you think about the euro, please, in America, stop thinking about the euro as an economic problem. And every time you're told that the euro is resisting and that it will stay forever, do not take it as an economic success or anything. Take it as a measure of authoritarian and anti-democratic tendency. And if the euro survives, well, democracy will not. Well, I'm not saying that the euro is a fascist system, but...
Well, there's a lot to discuss, and everybody will have a chance to respond. Emmanuel thinks they can't, and I want to go back to him, and also to talk a little bit about what he thinks would happen. One of our questions was really, do we want the euro to survive? And if it doesn't, what happens? That question has been addressed by many of our panelists, but I wanted Emmanuel to take a shot at it from his point of view. Emmanuel?
Well, I'm not quite sure I'm truly interested in in decisions and what should be done and so on, because I think we're at the beginning of a rather typical historical situation where things are getting out of control, and we have to deal with. It's not incompetence of the elite. It's just historical mistakes on an incredible scale, and obviously we're headed for a general crisis, and people will talk about reforms, things. In France, we all know that every time we say that some problem will be treated at the European level, it means that nothing will be done. it can be nice. You see, I was very much opposed to the to French intervention in Syria, and as soon as I heard, I'm no longer saying le président Hollande. Now I call him Vice Chancellor Hollande because of the. You see, it's more reasonable. But as soon as I heard Vice Chancellor Hollande tell us that the Syrian question would be treated at the European level, I felt safe. I knew nothing would be done. I think I'm very sorry. I'm no longer interested in the technicalities of the reform. I'm just now taking the very fact that people think that it is unthinkable to get out of a human creation. I mean, the euro was invented, created, it doesn't work, and now we have elites all over Europe thinking that nothing can be done about it. But this is basically a religious problem. And the very idea that we cannot get rid of the euro, well, suggests that there's no such thing as free individuals on earth, that political systems cannot act, that humans cannot master their destiny. There is a sort of cultural crisis, underlying cultural crisis. And I think, for me, to me, as a historian, the interesting thing would be to analyze the European crisis more generally. You see, it's we're not talking about demography, for instance. What's typical of what's happening in Europe, or rather what's not happening, is very typical of an aging continent with the oldest population on Earth, with very low birth rates. I mean, the fertility rate all over Europe, continental Europe, France and Scandinavia excepted, is something between 1.3 and 1.5 children per woman. Germany is, together with Japan, the oldest country on Earth, where the median age of the population might be close to 44. France must be close to 41, the US 38. You see, big differences. And again, if you look at the differences in birth rates or fertility rates throughout Europe, you'll see that there is no such thing as Europe. I mean, you have now, for demographers, think that, well, nations, and especially developed nations, are diverging rather than converging. This is what fertility rates tell us. So we have two Europes, and there's nothing, and there's no link between the demographic map of Europe and the euro. I mean, individualistic countries with a traditionally high status of women, the UK, Scandinavian countries, France, have something around 2.0, 2.1 children per woman, just like the US. Again, when you look at rates, this is where you can feel true cultural or social anthropological affinities. And all the countries with a traditionally low status of women, and also with authoritarian tradition, by the way, if you look at European history, have very low birth rates. So I'd like to say, to finish this, that I sympathize with the British dilemma entirely. I mean, Britain's position is horrible when you think of it. You see, they're very close and very dependent in terms of trade from a dying continent. I mean, well, continental Europe is an aging continent, committing suicide under German leadership, a very common European thing, in a way. But culturally, Britain belongs to this much wider Anglo-American world. And do you realize that perhaps 10 years from now, you'll have more inhabitants in the Anglo-American world, that is the US, Canada, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, than in continental Europe, so from France to, well, not including the Ukraine and Russia? I mean, Europe is, Europe is in a very bad shape, and there is a cultural crisis underneath. So, in a way, this is what we ought to analyze and to try to understand why no decision can be taken, why nothing happens in the face of massive cultural, social, and economic disaster. This is again we're moving to all Europe, but I'd say a sort of a not optimistic, but not too pessimistic word to finish. That's the good thing with aging population is that you have no political trouble, no revolution, no fascism, nothing violent. Together with the inability to take decisions, you've got the impossibility of violence. So there is hope.
I don't know. Young people may decide to cut Social Security.
I'd like to hear a discussion about the dichotomy between the low birth rate and the youth unemployment. They seem to be things that should be working together.
Oh yes, it's very much the same thing. It's and there's a lot of a great part of the German success in keeping wages low has to do with demography, because Germany actually has a decreasing population, so rents are not a problem, and a lot of so it's it's the usual. We have discussions of this type in France. So you say in France we have a sort of the French elite among the elite in France, we have a sort of German neurosis. You see, the country is very different, but the French governing classes, the upper classes, are admire Germany. They think the Germans are so efficient, and it's so nice to govern in Germany with such a disciplined population, something we do not have in France. So the part of the situation in France now, I think I'm not narcissistic here, because I think France was the great promoter of the euro, and now it's the key element in the system. The day France decides the game is over, the euro is dead. So it's important to talk about France. Now I'll get back to demography. So we have this kind of political discourse in France where these days, a little less now, but it was more obvious in the Sarkozy days, that we are supposed to imitate Germany. We are supposed. I mean, it's as if the French could become Germans. You see, that would be a loss to the world, I think, and to Germany also. I'm sure.
But let's get back to the youth unemployment.
Yes, the youth unemployment. That's so. In discussion, I say, okay, well, if we've got to be like the Germans, we must kill off 30% of our children. Because the kind of functioning of the economy you have in Germany, with a sort of a low turnover, and you don't need so many jobs every year, you see, it just cannot be done in France. And so we have a miserable youth and so on. It's the reason why every time I hear about most of them, I'm furious about European project, but I'm especially furious when I hear things about European project for the youth, for young people, because there's no such thing as young European people. And again, the French situation is different from that of Spain and Italy, where youth unemployment has.
I do think we've been talking about.
I'd like to add one thing which might be relevant to what you said. I think there's the euro is basically something archaic. I mean, all European developed societies are now under stress because of the general crisis of globalization, and this stress and the attempts at solving problems is in fact producing divergence at a moment when what was expected was convergence. And now, when this appeared to me at the time when I was visiting the Tohoku, the devastated regions in northern Japan after the tsunami, I was a Japanese journalist and interviewing people. Of course, I can't speak a word of Japanese, so everything was translated to me. Tohoku is a very conservative region within Japan, a conservative country, so much like Germany in terms of demography and so on. And it was so, well, of course, perhaps you could take the tsunami as a metaphor. I'm not talking about the Fukushima mess, but you could take the tsunami as a metaphor of globalization, sort of a problem coming, that seems to come from elsewhere and puts society under stress. And it was so obvious that the solutions were going to be going back to the national culture, to what makes you safe and efficient. And everywhere, I think, the crisis is in fact producing a return to the idea of nation and national solidarity. But, as we said yesterday, one of the problems in Europe is that Germany, in spite of all the European discourse and so on, Germany started first because of reunification. So we have what we've had in Germany since 1990 is a truly national project with reforms, fight for efficiency, survival, with a rather intelligent and nicely planned strategy combining exports to the Eurozone, having parts produced in Eastern Europe, Central and Eastern Europe, outside of the Eurozone, with agreements on energy with Russia, an attempt at establishing links with China. So the truth in Europe is that at the heart of Europe, we now have a very impressive national project, and that's the German project.
I think,
and good luck to America with the new German problem.
To be fair to you.
Can I make 2 sentences?
Okay.
I shall perhaps say that still the dispute, we like each other. So, I mean...
I must tell you, her French is perfect, but she's very different in French.
I have cultural skills.
No, I think...
a little joke?
If you can make a little joke.
In France, we're not so keen on having the Germans tell us to lose our sovereignty.
Oh,